Welcome to Austen Mondays, everyone. I am your host, Edward G. Pettit from the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for 24 weeks, with just 1 week to go next week, we've been on a biblioventure with Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In each episode, I talk with a special guest, a brilliant Austen scholar, creator, or Janeite about Austen and her works, and then I have an hour-long conversational annotation with a chapter co-host in which we illuminate, elucidate, explicate a few chapters of Pride and Prejudice. And our special guest today is Claudia Johnson. Welcome, Claudia.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. This is the kind of occasion I just love, people reading together.
Good. I'm so happy we can have you back for this too. You know, we tried in October. That was when in last October I had the streaming issues. So thank you so much for returning.
Oh, the pleasure, I assure you, is mine.
All right, everyone. More with Claudia in a moment. Stay tuned for our chapter annotation segment when Dr. Kathleen Hudson will join me to talk about chapters 58 to 60 or volume 3, chapters 16 to 18, if that is how your book is divided. The Success of Mrs. Bennet, I'm calling this. And if you're watching live on YouTube right now, or if you're watching this recording, I invite you to please like the video and also subscribe to the channel. Doing that gives our show greater visibility and leads to more people discovering Austen Mondays. And stay tuned after our turn about the room when we'll draw the name of the winner of our second Austen Mondays raffle. This week, it's for a spot in the online Emma course, which will begin when this show is finished, led by Juliet Wells. So that will be a lot of fun. And I'm also going to announce later today on the show what the next book in the biblioventure series will be. So don't miss that later. Now let's take a turn about the room. Claudia L. Johnson joined the faculty at Princeton in 1994 and was chair of the English department from 2004 to 2012. She has written and edited many works on Austen, including Jane Austen's Cults and Cultures, a deluxe edition of Jane Austen's The Beautiful Cassandra, in collaboration with artist Leon Steinmetz, 30 Great Myths About Jane Austen in collaboration with Clara Toote, and who was also on one of our programs, and the Blackwell Companion to Jane Austen, edited with Clara Toote, and many more. I mean, we could spend 5 minutes listing all of your publications, Claudia. We are very happy to have you here to join us as the last guest to take a turn about the room with us.
Well, thank you so much. When I was thinking about what to talk to you about this evening, it occurred to me that Jane Austen is unlike most other authors in that she's not just read, but reread and reread and reread throughout one's lifetime, really. And that, she's a companion through life, basically, a companion as you grow up. And it occurs to me, alas, old dotard that I am, a companion as you grow old, actually. And as I am, we read Jane Austen, when we're part of the romance plot. Yeah. I read Austen when I was like older than Anne Elliot, and then I was older than Mrs. Dashwood, and then who in the hell knows how old Mr. Woodhouse is? But and what's interesting is that she gives you very different ways into the novel according to where you are in life. And the young people, when they read Jane Austen, I'm thinking of my students, are just enthralled with the electricity of the love plot.
Yeah.
And it is a passionate novel, and there is an electricity between Darcy and Elizabeth.
Did you have a moment that you remember when you first read or first discovered Austen?
I'm afraid I first discovered Austen with Sense and Sensibility, not Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, and
people have discovered with different books, sure.
Yeah, but for Pride and Prejudice is the one that everyone knows and that we hear so much about.
I think just as many as the people who have been on the show that I've asked the question it's been Emma or or Sense or a different one. Not everybody hit Pride and Prejudice first.
Right. The Pride and Prejudice is the one that that popular audiences read and read and read again, it's very satisfying. I mean, when I was older, what I loved more was the intricacies of character. Then I loved how effortlessly she described character and how effortlessly she delineated manners and tact. And what I'm sort of into now is two things. First of all, the complexity of her irony. And Pride and Prejudice is a great example of that. Let's take the first sentence, which everybody knows by heart. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. And we all know that that's ironic, right? That it's not universal. It's Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet wants to marry off her daughters.
Yeah.
This is not a universal truth, though she thinks it is. Further is that playful irony that the man is actually the property of the property grabbing mothers and daughters who are eager to kind of snap up that bachelor there. But I was thinking, that's exactly why everybody comes to the neighborhood in Pride and Prejudice. Collins comes to get married.
Yeah.
Bingley comes to get married, and he falls in love right away. Darcy comes to get married. He doesn't know it yet, but he falls in love mighty quickly.
He does. Yeah. He doesn't realize that, but yeah.
Yeah, right away. And in fact, as it turns out, the joke really isn't on Mrs. Bennet at all. It's on us for making fun of her.
Yeah. Today this episode is the success of Mrs. Bennet today.
That's what I gather from your title.
We all said it was ironic, and now wait a minute, it actually is true, or truer than we thought in perhaps a slightly different way.
Yeah, which means that yes, it's ironic, but the irony doesn't stop. It sort of keeps going. And just as you think you're the one who you got the joke turns out to be on you. For setting your understanding above Mrs. Bennet. And I know that you yourself mentioned that as you grow old, you're very struck with what a bad father Mr. Bennet is.
I moved from that, like you said, you're like the students. I mean, when I first read, I've talked about this before on the show, that I fell in love with every Austen heroine, and that was how I focused on the novel. I couldn't get past that in a sense. That's my entry point as a reader, and now they're all daughters to me. So now that's how I see them, and so I wind up really thinking about how the fathers are behaving and what they're doing and how that influences them. But there's myriad ways as we grow older that our perspective itself changes.
It's true. And, one conclusion that leads us to is that maybe Mrs. Bennet, though incredibly obnoxious, is actually trying to be a good parent. Trying to provide for her daughters who are on the brink of ruin if they don't get good matches.
We talked about that a couple times, how she may not understand the intricacies of an entailment and why it exists and all that, but she certainly understands the consequences.
Yeah, and the consequences in this novel are very dire, really. When Mr. Bennet dies, they're turned out of the house, and we know that Mr. Collins comes, and when he comes, he takes note of all the furniture. He's very aware that all of this property is going to be his soon. So, you can spend a lifetime reading Jane Austen, and then all of a sudden, realize that the very first sentence you've misunderstood for your, or not paid adequate attention to for your entire life. Then there's that sublime understatement Mr. Collins was not a clever man. You know, what does it take after years of reading Jane Austen? I pause over the brilliance of that understatement.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much more you could say about his really kind of mind-boggling inability to understand certain things or to sympathize with certain things. It's kind of serious, you know. I have this theory that Jane Austen is a very 18th century writer because she's very interested in stupidity, you know, and that's a very 18th century subject, you know.
Is it interesting? Yeah.
Well, Pope wrote an epic poem on dullness, you know, and Fielding and, you know, Fox. Yeah. And, you know, they're very interested in failures to understand. Swift is very interested in that. And it's a subject of actual some seriousness.
Well, Johnson writes a dictionary to combat it.
Absolutely. And, you know, certainly in light of the various Me Too consciousness raisings, you know, Mr. Collins's inability to hear no.
Yeah.
It's kind of serious. You know, this is a comic novel. It doesn't come to anything violent, but there is something really disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
About not taking no for an answer. So those are also the kinds of things that you know you come to realize as life changes, as you change. There's another reason that I'm really interested in Pride and Prejudice now, and I hope you will excuse me for saying it. It's for escape.
Yeah.
Escape. You know, when I was younger, I would be really angry if anybody suggested you could read Jane Austen for escape, because I thought that was a slap in the face to Austen's, you know, seriousness. But now I actually understand what her power of consolation is. Pride and Prejudice is really striking to me because it's the only novel by Jane Austen where the smart people and the rich people and the good people are the same people. You know, where authority is actually, you know, good. It's somewhat true in Emma too, but you know, there's a lot of other disturbing things that happen in Emma. Take this line. This is when Elizabeth is talking to her sister, and her sister is trying to think, oh, maybe marrying Mr. Collins isn't so bad. Charlotte Lucas, you know, will get used to him and blah, blah, blah. And Elizabeth says, Mr. Collins is a conceited, pompous, narrow-minded, silly man. You know he is. As well as I do, and you must feel as well as I do, that a woman who married him cannot have a proper way of thinking. It's very striking. Conceited, pompous, narrow-minded, silly. You almost never get the unvarnished truth in Jane Austen's because you have to be polite. You know, you have to be, you know, measured. But there's no politeness here, no polite equivocation. They're alone and they can tell the truth. She feels that she can tell the truth safely and confidently. And the reason I think this can happen is because authority in this novel is good. Mr. Bennet will not force her to marry Mr. Collins. You know, Lydia Bennet will not die. You know, the Bennet sisters will not be destitute. It's not a perfect world, but it is a safe world, in part because there's Darcy, they're the gardeners. They're all of these people who sort of are moral anchors. And I think in the other novels, that's much less true. And as the world around us right now has so little dignity, has so little common sense, shall I say, where authority is just not reliable, where the public sphere seems hopelessly corrupt, where stupidity doesn't seem to be contained, or admitted or recognized. I've got to say, Austen has a very consolatory power, particularly at my age, at this particular moment.
That escape that offers as well. That it reminds me that Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien on escape, and where he says, there's nothing wrong with escape. What if you're the prisoner?
That's right.
Escape is the most, the wonderful thing you could do. And
that's right.
And it speaks to the condition of our lives. And sometimes we do feel imprisoned by certain social conditions.
Yeah.
These books can provide that.
Yeah, or in despair in some way. And, in Pride and Prejudice, she really represents a world that's sort of corrigible. You can correct it. Lady Catherine's petty despotism can be contained. Even Mrs. Bennet's vulgarity can be contained. Wickham can be controlled or appeased. It's not that it's utopia. But that the forces of intelligence, this is not the case in Sense and Sensibility. The good people are the poor people. They're the ones who are sort of disinherited and not really recognized.
And also by the end of that novel, that Marianne may have that, marriage, or Eleanor may have that marriage that she wants, but Marianne is kind of convinced into it, almost more like a Charlotte in a sense. Not that Colonel Brandon's anything like Mr. Collins, but Marianne is certainly not in love with him as all the other women who marry men in these novels.
Yes, and the world of power, has disinherited Edward. And we all know the scandalous stories that happened with Colonel Brandon's father and and brother. I mean, there's been a lot of injury in that, in that novel. I take the wonderful persuasion, it ends with the threat of war, which ironically, some people are looking forward to because so the fact that the world can be a good place where goodness can thrive and be cultivated and wrongdoing can be contained. I don't know. I just think that's a kind of fabulous achievement on Austen's part. And also the only time she did it.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's not her most typical novel. There's nothing like it in her other novels, really.
You've had a lifetime now of reading these Austen works, and do you return to them? I mean, because clearly you still teach them, but do you turn to them even though it's not on the syllabus? Is there time?
Well, when I'm called upon, like to write essays or deliver keynotes or something, I read them and I become quite absorbed in them. But there really isn't a lot of time to just sit around and read her for pleasure, anymore. But every time I read her, it is with an acute sense of pleasure at her complexity, at her just marvelousness, It's kind of a convention among Janeites, and I put myself in this category, to brag about how often they read her. I read her every year. I've read her 10 times. I've read her 100 times. It's a lifetime of reading. Do you think that's true with other novelists?
Some it is, and it's I find that with Austen it may be more than other. I mean, I have Dickens here behind me, and
I see him,
and I'm very. And I know lots of people very involved with Dickens and read Dickens every year. They're reading a novel. That's always the case, but not the sheer numbers that turn
Yes.
to Austen.
Yeah, partly it's a question of the size of her canon, that, it's kind of manageable.
Yeah.
And yet within itself, it seems very infinite.
Hmm.
And I think that's why people can return to her and sometimes feel that the novel is completely new.
I can't think, there was a famous historian, scholar, I can't remember who it is, asked if he ever read novels, and he says, yes, I read novels. I read all 7 of them every year, Jane Austen.
Right. Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah, I forget which British philosopher said
Yeah.
that. Yeah, and that's another really interesting thing, is that, Jane Austen used to be kind of a man's novelist, soldiers.
Yeah, at that
her.
turn of the century. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And I don't know why that changed, but I think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, turn of the 20th century. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even into the 30s.
Yeah.
But I think it must be, a post-World War II thing,
Hmm.
that, that it changed. It seems so obvious to us now, but I mean, some early commentators actually thought that women writers didn't like her, and that women didn't like her because she didn't make such a big deal over the love plot.
Hmm.
I mean, that's Charlotte Bronte, right?
Yeah. What we also talked about, and you're talking about these kind of ways the text changes. It's also, you had said to me that, Austen can be hard, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that kind of, in a sense, increases over time too, doesn't it? Usually things get easier over time, but Austen, in a sense, can you talk about that? How she gets harder, in a sense?
It's so interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I can really account for it. It's part of what people call the miracle of Jane Austen. But take that first sentence that we just read together. When you're reading the novel for the first time, you don't stop and think about it. But that sentence is what I might call a booby trap.
Yeah.
And you fall right in, and you read on, assuming that you understand what she meant. But when you read as an older person, I think you read much more slowly, and you kind of savor the rhythm and the subtlety of each sentence, because the plot is no longer of great interest to you, but it's the language, I think, that becomes more and more interesting. So she comes to us appearing to be very simple, but actually she's not very simple. A sentence like the opening of Pride and Prejudice is actually hard.
Yeah.
It's not like Finnegan's Wake hard. It seems easy, but it's actually quite difficult. Yeah. This is, something that Northanger Abbey. Have you read that?
Oh, sure. Well, we haven't done it like this, but yes.
But no, I mean, in your group, it has this line that says, a woman, if she has the misfortune of knowing anything at all, should conceal it as well as she can, because having knowledge will prevent your being able to gratify the vanity of men who were talking to you. So I've often thought that's actually Austen telling us about herself there, that she's a writer who actually kind of conceals what she knows, doesn't just display what she knows. And I think that's a condition of her popularity.
Yeah. We have to dive in and do that work ourselves as readers.
Exactly. Yeah. She doesn't make it easy on you.
And pleasurable work.
Yeah, absolutely. But also dangerous, because if you think you're in on the joke, you're likely to fall into one of the booby traps.
Mhm.
And so she keeps you on your toes. I like to tell my students that Jane Austen makes you smart, with the pun on smart, that sometimes, you do a double take as though you've had a little slap across your face, and that also, it hurts us for a second, but it also makes you smarter, and it makes you the kind of reader who's equipped to read her well.
Mhm. Good. All righty. Well, this has been a great pleasure. Do you have anything coming up? Are you working on anything right now? Not necessarily Austen related?
I'm very interested in letterpress printing lately.
Oh,
And setting letters the old-fashioned way. And so I've taken a great interest in aspects of Austen's novels that were obviously a challenge to typesetters. I'm sure you've talked about free and direct discourse, where
yeah.
a character is thinking to herself, and it seems like dialogue, but in fact it's not spoken, it's thought.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many places in Pride and Prejudice and Mansfield Park where you can see that Austen, who's the first novelist to really develop this way of representing people's thoughts, people's consciousness, you can see that they're not familiar with it because they want to put it in quotation marks when it's clear that it is not spoken but thought.
Yeah.
And it makes me think to myself, what must it have been like for people to read Austen for the first time and encounter this relatively new way
Yeah.
of representing what somebody's thinking.
We'll have
as they're thinking it, as though you're in their mind.
Yeah. We'll have a small group of people dealing with that with Emma, in which it is, in which she masters that
Absolutely.
technique.
Absolutely.
Coming up soon.
So. Yeah. And I'm also working on that diarist, Anne Lister.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She's very, very interesting. And I thought I would sort of transcribe and annotate one complete year. She's actually a contemporary of Jane Austen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in many ways, she is a Regency figure as much as Jane Austen is. And when she writes about village life, it's returning visits, having visits, returning visits, certain standards of politeness. It's very, very striking.
That is fascinating. I look forward to that. Well, Claudia, thank you so much for taking a turn about the room with us.
It's really a pleasure. I envy everyone in your audience for the chance to read through these novels slowly. So thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Good.
Okay.
We'll speak again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, everyone, thanks to all the brilliant Austen scholars, creators, and Janeites who have joined us for a turn about the room. I hope you have all enjoyed these chats as much as I have during the run of Austen Mondays. Let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Austen lovers worldwide. And if you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. You can learn more about how to do those things on our website. And at the end of every show, I give a shout out to all who have donated since our last show. Now, on to the Austen Mondays raffle. We have 2 more raffles tonight and then one next week. And your contributions via the raffle help us to create more programs like Austen Mondays. And remember, you can buy as many raffle tickets as you'd like for each raffle to increase your chances of winning. And each week is a new raffle. So the tickets purchased as of 5 p.m. today are good only for this raffle tonight. And then for next week's prize, you purchase new tickets for that one. And to draw a name again, I would like to bring in the mighty Lulu. There you go. And this is Lulu is the creator, the editor of the opening and closing credits that we've done for this show. And this week's prize is a reserved seat in our upcoming online course, Reading Austen's Emma with Juliet Wells. That course is also half full already from the members signing up for it. Members can still sign up for that for the next couple of days. On this Thursday, it opens up to the general public. Lulu, we have a name?
We got a name.
And that name is Pauline Searcy. That's so wonderful. Pauline has been in Rosenbach courses before. I'm so happy that you won this one, Pauline, and will be taking this Emma course. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lulu.
Bye. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Dr. Johnson. I saw you. I know her.
All righty. Lulu will be heading up to Princeton in the fall to hopefully take some courses with Claudia Johnson. Thank you to everyone who bought tickets. Next week's prize for the raffle is a private tour of the Rosenbach's Austen holdings with, share this picture with me. I will, the raffle is for you and 9 guests, and you can come to the Rosenbach to have a private tour, and I'll show you the Austen books. I'll show you some of the other things related to Austen, some of the authors that she loved that we have in our collection. We have all Richardson's books as well in first editions. And if you cannot come to the Rosenbach, if you don't live in this area, we can do this whole thing virtually, and it's quite an enjoyable experience to do that as well. So this raffle will be good. We'll be up all week, and you can buy tickets and entries begin at $15, available on our website. Follow the link in the chat. Buy as many tickets as you'd like and increase your odds of winning. So Kathleen Hudson joins us for today's chapter annotation segment. Welcome, Kathleen.
Very, very glad to be here. Very glad to be here.
We are almost wrapping up the novel.
Almost.
We saved one chapter for next week.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's so funny that Dr. Johnson was talking about the pleasure of reading Austen again, because this was usually I when I'm preparing to come on the show, I sit and I take like a couple pages of notes or something on whatever it is we're working on. But I started reading this with every intention of taking notes, and I just got so wrapped up in it that I completely forgot to write anything down. So, but it was just one of those things where I got so wrapped up in the pleasure of rereading it that I completely forgot to tackle it in any kind of academic way. And I'm like, you know what? I won't take notes this time, because
no, you don't have to.
I just it was just so so good, so enjoyable, so you just sank back into it. It was great.
Good. All right. Well, it'll be fun today, but
yes.
First I have to announce the next weekly biblioventure show, and that'll be coming up. It'll start in September, and I'll start off with a little stanza from a poem that'll give you the hint, and maybe by the end of it, you'll realize what it is. And it is, you know what it is. I'm telling you.
I know what it is, but yes.
A yellow fog swirls past the window pane as night descends upon this fabled street. A lonely hansom splashes through the rain. The ghostly gas lamps fail at 20 feet. Here, though the world explode, these two survive, and it is always 1895. That is a stanza from Vincent Starrett's 221B poem. And I'll put on the Dear Stalker, which means the Rosenbach's new biblioventure series starting in September will focus on Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. We're taking a deep dive into the adventures of the world's first consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his assistant, Dr. John Watson, as they battle the criminal forces of London. We'll begin with the first case, A Study in Scarlet, and continue with each story as they were chronologically published, finishing with The Adventure of the Empty House. That's 27 stories in 30 weeks. It'll be the longest show that we've done. It'll start on September 18th later this year, and it'll run until April 2024. The schedule of all the dates, it's a Monday show. It's Sherlock Mondays. And the schedule is on the registration page. I encourage you all to register as soon as possible so I can start sending out information and getting everybody excited by it. We'll have a Facebook group for it, of course. One of the co-hosts will be Anastasia Klimchinskaya, who some of you may know was one of the co-hosts on Sundays with Frankenstein. She'll be returning to do this because does lots of Sherlockian work herself. We'll have 3 other co-hosts that I'll rotate with during the show. The big connection here is that we have some great things in our collections at the Rosenbach. We have some of the Sherlock Holmes books in first editions, but most importantly, we have the handwritten manuscript of The Empty House, the story we'll finish on. So it's a story when Sherlock returns, and
yes,
so
he is begrudgingly resurrected.
I am so. I mean, I own a deer stalker.
I was going to say. I mean, I think if the hat didn't clue us in, then
I didn't just get this hat for today's announcement.
Yeah,
I have a deer stalker. I have a big Sherlock collection. I'm involved in the local Baker Street Irregulars Scion of Philadelphia, the Copper Beaches. So I'm ready. I'm ready for sure. And it's a show I can smoke my pipe on it, and
exactly. You're in
place.
Character all the time, so it's great.
Do you know, Kathleen, I have never, because I didn't read Sherlock when I was a kid. I really started reading Sherlock as an adult, and I've never read a Sherlock Holmes story while not smoking. So there you go.
See, I mean, would you even know how to do that now?
Pipe,
like,
yeah. Well, this is going to be fun. Let us move on with this show so we can finish up. I hope you're all excited about this. This is going to be and what's even more fun is that because it's a story a week, I think we'll have a much greater chance of generating audience later in the run that people can jump in at any time because it's this
and everyone
story
has their favorite story. So there's Sherlock moment.
I also enjoy a cocktail every week, inspired by the chapters we're reading. And today's drink I'm calling In the Middle. And it's bourbon, honey wine, a little dash of Campari, and an orange slice garnish. It's from when Elizabeth asked Darcy to account for his having ever fallen in love with her. And he says, I was in the middle before I knew.
It does sound like the kind of drink that you could be in the middle of before you've had that much.
It's a true cocktail. It's booze plus booze plus booze. Well, but the one booze is just
the true cocktail. Yeah.
So, yes. And the bourbon, I thought, with a strong base, a lot of depth to it. The honey wine for that touch of sweetness, and then a dash of Campari, little extra flavor. This is what I'm hoping for their union going forward.
So it's a very optimistic drink.
And I said garnish with a happy fruit, which is an orange. And I thought, what is the happiest fruit? And I thought the orange has got to be really up there. It's
for color, it's got to be orange, right?
Yeah. So
that would it. Although now that's gonna be my new probably question, like icebreaker question is, what do you think is the happiest fruit? And then obviously if they don't answer orange, I'm gonna have to not be their friend anymore. So
there you go. So all righty. Well, let us move on with our chapters. Today is chapters, load this up here. Today is chapters 58 to 60, which I'm calling The Success of Mrs. Bennet.
Mm-hmm. Which I thought was a very interesting title, but again, you and Dr. Johnson spot on, which is, it is, who has the last laugh here, really?
Yeah.
Really.
Well, it's interesting. She gets quiet too. Well, she explodes.
Who finally learns restraint, but also gets the last laugh.
Talking, which is funny. But she's not going to stop talking in front of her own family or in front of her neighbors and sister and all that stuff. So
everyone's talking in this. Lucases have talked. Collins has talked. Everyone's talked.
Everyone's been talking about this because
everyone knows except the two people involved.
That's how we're coming into this. Everyone thinks Darcy is going to marry Elizabeth, except Elizabeth.
Yeah.
She's still going back and forth over whether or not he's in love with her. She knows he's the one for her, but she's not willing to risk believing that he wants her, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, they're two more apparently insecure about the strangest things people you'll never meet, because, you know, which I think is such an interesting, again, for a book that's literally called Pride and Prejudice, and the chapters, once they actually figure out what's going on, they do spend a lot of time, again, very much humbling themselves in front of each other for it.
As we'll see today. And didn't Elizabeth give that? She gave the advice to her sister Jane to, like, don't be silly. Just like Bingley's in love with you. Just believe it and accept it. And Elizabeth doesn't take that herself. So
no, do what I say, not what I do here.
Yeah. All righty. Well, chapter 58, and if you have an edition that's divided into volumes and chapters, it's volume 3, chapters 16 to 18 today. Beginning of chapter 58, instead of receiving any such letter of excuse from his friend, as Elizabeth half expected Mr. Bingley to do, he was able to bring Darcy with him to Longbourn before many days had passed after Lady Catherine's visit. Elizabeth's expecting a letter from Bingley saying, like, Darcy's not coming.
Yeah. Just to reinforce the Lady Catherine horror.
And she's making herself think this. She's she's coming up with scenarios ahead of time to not be disappointed. But of course, they both show up. Bingley says, Bingley, who wanted to be alone with Jane, proposed they're all walking out, because then he and Jane can
love this as a strategy, which is, there's no requirement that we have to walk together, apparently. If we just slow down enough.
But he can't just say, we're going to go take a walk by ourselves. They still need others who they will quickly outdistance. And
I do love, too, that a lot of pressure is really put on Kitty at this point of, like, Kitty's the one, I guess, fifth wheel here who and she runs off pretty much as soon as she can.
Well, Elizabeth is stuck with Darcy and Kitty. But of course,
just imagine
as soon as they're out, and Kitty's not saying anything, and Elizabeth.
And I do like that Elizabeth was secretly forming a desperate resolution, and perhaps he might be doing the same. That she still doesn't know what he's doing, but I also love that she calls it a desperate resolution. Like, it does feel like that. It does feel like you got to do it now. We're only like 20 pages from the end. You got to move.
She's done with waiting. But she needs her opportunity. Kitty decides to stop at the Lucases to see Mariah, and she does that. And Elizabeth takes her chance. It's interesting. She opens up though with letting Darcy know that she knows about his helping Lydia by paying off Wickham.
And framing, and I am a very selfish creature. This kind of kicks off a pattern where they both do, again, really humble themselves in front of each other. I'm a selfish creature. I'm going to say this thing. It may not be, I care not how much I may be wounding your feelings. I can no longer help thanking you for your unexampled kindness to my poor sister. And were it known to the rest of my family, I should not have merely my own gratitude to express. So again, awareness too, I think. I mean, so much of Elizabeth's anxiety over the last couple of chapters has also been recognizing that her mother has been abominably rude to somebody to whom she owes a great deal.
And Darcy's response to all this is, if you will thank me, he replied, let it be for yourself alone. The wish of giving happiness to you might add force to the other inducements which led me on. I should not attempt to deny, but your family owe me nothing. Much as I respect them, I believe I thought only of you. I did it all for you.
And at this point, I stopped even attempting to take notes, because I was just like, now was the deep sighing. Like, every family member who was walking past me at this point was like, are you okay? I'm like, no, I'm not.
It still works, doesn't it? It works.
It does.
Big time. Elizabeth, that silences her. She's too embarrassed to say a word. And then he comes in with the whole,
Yeah.
If your feelings are what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections are and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever. I mean, tell me if you still hate me, and because I still love you.
Yes, yeah. In a way, he really, I mean, she initiates the conversation, but he really does take the plunge here.
Finally.
Yes, yeah. And I appreciate that it is almost a strange reversal writing wise. Like the same thing, but different. You pointed out, which I had not picked up before, but which I thought was great during the proposal scene, that Austen doesn't put into a dialogue, explicit dialogue, much of Darcy's proposal.
Yeah.
And at this point, she does the same thing to Elizabeth, where she doesn't put into specific dialogue. She forced herself to speak, and immediately, though not very fluently, gave him to understand that her sentiments had undergone so material a change as to make her receive with gratitude and pleasure his present assurances. So again, that she doesn't put, I mean, they then have a very, very long discourse over the next 3 chapters, but that she doesn't put into dialogue.
This is the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And
You'd think this is the I love you moment.
It says, the happiness which this reply produced was such as he had probably never felt before. He expressed himself on the occasion as sensibly and warmly as a man violently in love can be supposed to do. But
what does that mean?
Yeah, we get this kind of, it's like a very formal narrator saying, it's almost like the narrator is like pulling the
curtain here. Like, I'm not actually gonna.
And it's become a kind of private moment, like for these characters, like, yes, now they're in love and they're together and they're going to express themselves together. And like, we're not invited to really see and hear his reaction. It's like the narrator's protecting their happiest moment from the audience. Yeah.
And again, with that proposal scene, like you said, it was so much about how they're perceiving each other. We don't get Darcy's explicit proposal and all the insults he apparently throws at her because we're seeing this through Elizabeth's point of view.
Yeah.
Well, now we're just getting the broad strokes and kind of not, we are seeing it through their point of view, but not. And I do like, again, that it's the language of sentimentality to a certain extent, which and sensibility, which is, it's not necessarily even what you say, it's your emotional truth. It's how you express that. And, had Elizabeth been able to encounter his eyes, she might have seen how well the expression of heartfelt delight diffused over his face became him. But she could not look, she could listen. He told her of his feelings. So it's that interplay again in sort of the language of sentiment between words, but also the physical performance of emotion, that they're seeing, but they're not seeing. And it's still very, very much, within that discourse.
It's the moment, and they're in love, and we don't quite get to see it all, but it happened. We're all there. And then I love this next line, because they walked on without knowing in what direction. And that's like, that's saying more than what's going on here. That is the kind of, that's the start of the relationship. Yeah,
they're on cloud 9. Doesn't matter where we're going. And it is the start, you're right, it is the start of the relationship too, then again, because then they talk. Like they really talk, and something I really, they go in depth. They're really exposing themselves and each other, really, and but it's safe and confident. They can be themselves with each other and be very honest.
Really talk about this stuff, not just a witty repartee back and forth thing. They can really talk. And we find out Darcy tells her right away that Lady Catherine did call on him, but unluckily for her ladyship, its effect had been exactly contrariwise, that he says, it taught me to hope, as I had scarcely ever allowed myself to hope before. I knew enough of your disposition to be certain that had you been absolutely irrevocably decided against me, you would have acknowledged it to Lady Catherine frankly and openly.
And instead of reading that as a pointed criticism of her, she jumps on it. It's like, you know me enough of my frankness to believe me capable of that. After abusing you so abominably to your face, I could have no scruple in abusing you to all your relations. But again, they know each other. And this is like, hey, this is somebody who knows me and including my faults and likes me anyway for some reason. So it is very, it's great.
I thought it was Lady Catherine whose character has ever been celebrated for its sincerity and frankness, as she said about herself. But no, it's Elizabeth, who made a joke to Lady Catherine about it before too. Like, I'm not as frank as you, of course. But,
no, of course, I can't presume.
But it is. This is what she does, and she knows it, and Darcy knows it.
Yeah. And his thing too, his response. And what did you say of me that I did not deserve? Acknowledging, your accusations were ill-founded, formed on mistaken premises. My behavior to you at the time had merited the severest reproof. It was unpardonable. And again, just very willing to be like, but you know what? I deserved it. Even if you were basing this on the wrong thing, you had no reason to think otherwise. He
acknowledges that she may have not understood his motives in a sense, but he acknowledges that the way he behaved was not, and it's especially that line. He said, that he's remembered. Had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner, that was the cutting thing that she had said to him.
Yeah.
Like, he knew it, and it did. He realizes that he was not behaving as a gentleman behaves.
Yeah. I cannot be so easily reconciled to myself. This is she really challenged him on the right where it hurts, right where he thought he was most secure. She and with her too, right. He hit her right where she thought she was the most secure as well in her perception.
And it winds up being that moment too, because the novel's Pride and Prejudice, and it's not about a dichotomy. He's not pride and she's not prejudice.
No.
They both mix together, but it's also not always the bad thing. And because it's his pride in being a gentleman that makes him realize that, like, no, I have to be better.
Yes.
And so pride in this sense kind of helped him turn himself around.
And prejudice too. I mean, again, she's working with what she has to work with. And if, a lack of prejudice is how we get, the Wickhams of the world, essentially. Yeah.
He asked about the letter that he gave her. Did that help? And that she says that gradually all her former prejudices had been removed.
And this is just such good dialogue. He said, did it soon make you think better of me?
Soon, I like that.
And the double, he's not, he really, oh gosh, he's really carrying a lot of the weight here.
I didn't count them in this chapter, but I did the next two because I really noticed it. There are so many instances of italics in these chapters right now. There's over 8 in the next chapter, and there was over 10 and 60, and I didn't go back and count them in here, but it's that recognition that these characters are emphasizing like Austen seems very attuned to their speech right now.
And that and that now there's no double reading. Before there was the possibility of double reading, but now not only is there emphasis, but it's emphasis she's making very apparent. It's like, now we get it. Now
the narrator's cluing us in, because like all of Austen's works, you misread so much the first time you read it, and then
she left us dangling for most of the book, and now she's like, see, I'm emphasizing soon here.
And in this, I don't know if this happens in other novels, but at the end of Pride and Prejudice here, Austen as a narrator is really asserting control over how the reader reads the text. It's like, this is how you have to read it. I'm putting these several words all throughout here that people are going to say in italics, so you get like what's going on. So emphasis to convey meaning is what you use the italics for, and she does that frequently here. He talks a little more about the letter. He says that he must
early part of the letter he really doesn't like.
Yes.
And I like, it's interesting too, her response, we both have reasons to think my opinion's not entirely unalterable, but they're not, I hope, quite so easily changed as that implies, that we are still talking really about that same early conversation we were having with Bingley about, how one changes one's, again, prejudice and pride too, how one changes one's opinion. Does one do that based on what other people tell them or just won't hold fast. And, Elizabeth too is trying to work her way through it. But yeah, him admitting that it was written in dreadful bitterness of spirit, even as I believe myself perfectly calm and cool.
Yeah. But that
Yeah.
you're right, that word that he's also saying that he's not the same person now as when he wrote the letter.
Yeah.
And I like her response to this. She says, you must learn some of my philosophy. Think only of the past as its remembrance gives you pleasure. I mean, I wish I could do that myself, like that's and Darcy's response is, I must keep thinking of my mistakes. So I
can improve from them.
So I can improve on them. And I guess it's as long as you've learned from the bad stuff, though, it's good to move on and then think of but as long as you've learned from it and as long as you acknowledge it, that you can move on.
And his defense of her too, I cannot give you credit for any philosophy of the kind. Your retrospections must be so totally void of reproach that the contentment arising from them is not philosophy, but what is much better of innocence. Again, this guy's got it bad. He's very in love with this woman. He's like, you didn't do anything wrong. This was all me. He's taking it all on himself, which again is still a very kind of self-focused way of doing it. But that
she does it too. It's winds up being both of them. They're both like, no, it's my fault. No, it's my fault.
Yeah. They're in love.
That's the way you resolve things.
No, it's my fault. And it does open it up, I thought, to a very interesting paragraph about his childhood and it's a very self-critical thing about that he was taught what was right, but I was not taught how to correct my temper.
Mm-hmm.
And he admits to pride and conceit and being the only son and being he calls himself selfish and overbearing. Again, I don't think it's a totally fair critique. There's certainly elements of it. I'm sure he does have a certain amount of pride. I don't think he cares for none but beyond my own family circle or think meanly of all the rest of the world. To wish at least to think meanly of their sense and worth compared to my own. Again, there may be elements of that, but he's kind of making himself out to be this monster.
He can fall prey to that kind of thinking as he has done. And but he's being very honest with himself, and she's led into that, and that's how
you taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous.
Don't skip the first part.
Oh yeah.
Dearest.
Yes, such I was from 8 to 8 and 20, and such I might still have been but for you, dearest, loveliest Elizabeth. What do I not owe you? You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you I was properly humbled. I came to you without a doubt of my reception. You showed me how insufficient were all my pretensions to please a woman worthy of being pleased.
There we go. Now we're in danger of getting chivalrous here. We got to be careful.
Yes, yeah. see, and again, all the love stuff we skipped earlier, we're definitely getting elements of it here. So she doesn't skimp on it. She just places it in a very non-conventional, I think, section after the fact.
She asks about what he thought when he ran into her at Pemberley, and he's like, oh, that I was just surprised, that wasn't a big deal. And then he talks about this, as we talked about, when we did this chapter, when she goes there, he says, my object then was to show you by every civility in my power that it was not so mean as to resent the past, and I hope to obtain your forgiveness to lessen your ill opinion by letting you see that your reproofs had been attended to. And it's interesting that Elizabeth recognized that he was so different, but she wouldn't take the final step thinking he's doing it for me.
Yeah, she wasn't going to take credit for it.
As her aunt completely saw.
Yes,
this happening.
And that too, I mean, at that point, Darcy really didn't have much reason to hope that she would necessarily accept a second proposal or anything like that, but he does it anyway because he still really wants her to care for him and approve of him, and that again to love without hope. That's his fidelity, which has been mentioned previously in the text, is in bright colors here as definitely being part of his character.
And he was given the opportunity accidentally. He had no idea she was going to be there. And it was her showing up there that spurred him on to finally do it. And yeah, it's one of those instances where if she doesn't go to Pemberley that day, this never happened.
could have never happened. And again, even, I mean, I know where the text is go. I've read Pride and Prejudice 5 million times, but it's the beauty of Austen that when I'm halfway through, I'm still feeling a little bit of anxiety of like, are they going to get together? Are you sure? Because it doesn't. I don't know how they get here from here. Just very easily.
She then brings up the whole Bingley and Jane. She wants to know whether he's surprised. Darcy, he says he's delighted with their engagement, and then she says, of course, that is to say, you had given your permission. I guessed as much, and yeah, he kind of confirms it. But he also confessed.
Yes, he confessed. He confessed
that he had a hand in separating them.
Yes,
and that's what really helped. So,
and Bingley, to his credit, I think, was angry, but is the human version of a golden retriever. So
he is, and
can't hold on to that for very long.
This chapter ends as Elizabeth longed to observe that Mr. Bingley had been a most delightful friend, so easily guided that his worth was invaluable. But she checked herself. She remembered that Darcy had yet to learn to be laughed at, and it was rather too early to begin. All right away. Now she's going back to her clever, I'm going to make comments.
Yes.
But she says, wait, not yet.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, that's such an interesting, because again, she's grown too. She would not have held back at the beginning of the novel. And also
soon enough she'll be doing it.
Yeah. But there is something so delightfully, I think, sweet too about the acknowledgement that it's too early, which means that there's going to be more. Yeah. Now there's a future there. And we're going to learn to be in a relationship together, which means that I'm not going to bust out the teasing right on the first, half hour.
Just got engaged literally on this walk.
Tone it down. You've got years. You've got loads of time.
Well, the next chapter, 59, she's, she doesn't want to tell anyone. She's afraid of their reaction.
How can she tell anybody? I mean, really?
Nobody likes Darcy, and she's one of the main reasons why no one likes Darcy, because she's always running him down and agreeing with everybody how proud and difficult he is. She's played into that whole public perception of him and her family.
And also, she's the joker of the family. So no one Jane is like, you need to be serious for 5 seconds. And Elizabeth keeps saying, no, I am being serious. And Jane's like, stop teasing. So this is what happens when you're the joker of the family, is no one takes you seriously.
What do you make of this? Darcy was not of a disposition in which happiness overflows in mirth. Sure, I get that. But Elizabeth, agitated and confused, rather knew that she was happy than felt herself to be so. That's interesting, huh? That now she's been so confused in what she feels and what and now that it's happened, it's like, she's still.
I know I'm happy. I know I'm supposed to be happy right now. I'm not feeling it yet. So
which is it's just as important for her to have her family know this, and for her to be in accord with her family as well as with him. Like, this is all part of it. She can't be in a relationship where everybody hates him. Everything needs to work. Everybody needs to be together.
And it is something, again, I appreciate or don't appreciate about certain adaptations, is that there are adaptations where I think the family, the depiction of the family as a family doesn't necessarily gel together. And there are adaptations where it is very clear, again, that while they drive each other nuts, they are still a family.
Yeah.
And she can't do this without the approval of her mothers and sisters, even Jane, but even the other sisters, any more than she can do it without the approval of her father, because they are a family.
I think the 205, the Kieran, I think that overcorrects that. I think
maybe overcorrect.
They're really happy together, and even Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are happy together. And I'm thinking, like, that's an overcorrection there.
Yeah,
but there is discord.
Yes,
there is Lydia, and but for the characters, and especially for Elizabeth, it's very important for them to be a family.
And Austen does such beautifully nuanced families anyway that it is very cool.
Well, she confesses to the most important person for her,
Yes,
in her family,
Jane.
which is Jane. She opened her heart to Jane, and Jane's response is,
You're
"You are
joking.
joking, Lizzie.
Yeah.
This cannot be engaged to Mr. Darcy. No, no, you shall not deceive me. I know it would be a." This is the same exact response, right, that Elizabeth gave Charlotte.
Yeah.
When Charlotte says, "I'm engaged to Mr. Collins," she's like, "Impossible."
Possible.
And that it's
Because he's impossible to like is also
Yeah.
too kind of the central thing of it cannot be. I know how much you dislike him, and which again I think is a legitimate concern, because Collins is selected in part for mostly all for security. I keep trying to give him some credit now. To select a husband for the security he will give. Obviously, especially if you're Charlotte, is a perfectly valid reason, I guess, to get married, but it's not the optimal reason, and that they're all picking up on this fear of you're marrying someone you dislike, because as we know, it's 10,000 a year. So
it's a nice life, Pemberley. We'll get to that line in a minute.
Yeah.
But it's that, Jane's response is, she convinces her, perhaps I did not always love him, but now I do. But Jane's response is, are you quite certain that you can be happy with him? This is the most important thing in all Austen novels for her characters in getting married.
Yes.
Is that, will you be happy? And that is, it's something that happens in novels, but not necessarily in real life. And we are not yet in the place when this novel is published in 1813, where the most important thing for almost anybody getting married is whether or not you will love the person and be happy with them. It is still an arrangement that there are so many other factors that come into play.
Yep.
And I think we passed that. I mean, I think certainly there's still issues with this, but it's rare
that's even
that
a
people
question.
will not even believe, they'll at least believe that they are in love, and that's why they're getting married.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case in Austen's. It's seldom the case in her day, but her novels always are about this point.
Yes.
That's
and then it does require to, again, it requires you to conceive of a future.
Yeah.
It's that, can you be in the future? Not are you happy now, but can you be in the future? Not are you overcome with your emotions? Are you, what are you thinking of? It's, can you be happy? Can you build a life on that? And it does kind of ask you to consider, will you change? Will he change? Has he changed? How do you build on that from there?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jane
which again, I think is one of the reasons why Austen distinguishes herself from other romance, and I use that term again very loosely, novelists, and definitely not novelists of sentiment of her own time, which is she conceives of life after marriage.
Yeah.
It's not just here's the young woman who faints quite a lot, who marries the chevalier, and then the marriage is the end. That's it, and then you go off. She does very often, I think, look past the marriage towards okay, where do we go from here?
And the characters talk about it, and the characters work out the differences before they get married. It's not outside obstacles preventing them from being married, and then they overcome them and they can then go off and be married. The obstacles are themselves. They are preventing it. Yes. And now they learn and change and go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's never just and then the aunt dies and comes into a magnificent fortune. And that's the only obstacle removed. It's no, who are you? Yeah.
Or, I mean, if, and someone else writing this novel, maybe, years previous, it's Lady Catherine prevents the marriage.
Yes.
And they have to wait for her to die or to okay it before they can do it. But not this time.
And then Jane's shipped off to a creepy castle, and then there's a whole different set of problems there. Yeah.
Jane asks her, she says, will you tell me how long you have loved him? And I love there's a mirroring here between this and then what happened in the next chapter. But Elizabeth's response is,
it has been coming on so gradually that I hardly know when it began. but I believe I must date it from my first seeing his beautiful grounds at Pemberley.
All right.
Another entreaty that she would be serious, however, produced the desired effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that she makes that a joke, and that,
And yet,
but it's true. It's not true in the like.
it's not true for the reasons you would think it would be true.
Yes.
Which is, I saw how loaded he is, and now I just can't help but fall in love with him. No, I saw how well I saw a future. Again, I saw a domestic future which is well managed and well maintained, that shares all the same tastes, and then by extension shares all the same values.
Yeah.
And also, I saw this guy for the first time. I saw him from a different angle I wasn't allowed to see before, and then I fell in love with him.
Yeah.
Or then I realized I was already in love with him.
Yes. And then he changed, and and everything kind of goes on from there. But I love that she begins it as a joke, and then has to
be serious. This is like the third time she said be serious.
And that Elizabeth's back to being herself. So for in this exchange. Well, now it's time that well, not yet, because they haven't told the family yet. And then later Darcy and Bingley show up again, and Mrs. Bennet, good gracious, as she stood at the window the next morning, this is the next day, is that disagreeable Mr. Darcy is not coming here again with our dear Bingley. Lizzie, you must walk out with him again, that he may not be in Bingley's way. It's right.
I'll throw one daughter on the fire to save the other.
This would usually be her plan. Lizzie, go out and walk with him so he'll fall in love with you. Now she's telling him just so he will, leave Bingley and Jane alone. I guess because they're not married yet.
Nope. You still need a chaperone. So I'll throw the two people who don't like each other together.
And she wants to make sure they stay as pleasant as possible. She doesn't want any second thoughts here. Well, they go out, but Kitty again. Well, no, Bingley says, "Oh, we're going to be walking too far for Kitty. Oh, yes. You can't come, right?" And Kitty's like, "Yeah, I don't want to go."
Yeah, that's fine. I don't want to come.
I wonder, is she getting that hint, or is because she doesn't get the hint?
It's really just the one line. Kitty owned that she had rather stay at home. It really, again, we're back to that. Could be any way you want to read that.
I wonder if she knows it, because she didn't get it when Mrs. Bennet was winking at her, right?
No. But last horse crosses the finish line eventually.
Maybe she did know, and she was just saying that to her mom. Oh, wait, why are you winking at me, Mom? Maybe she was being that way about it. I don't know.
I always prefer to think that most of the characters are quite a bit more perceptive than we, and are just trolling everyone around them.
And Mrs. Bennet's like, "I'm sorry, Lizzie. You should be forced to have that disagreeable man all to yourself, but I hope he will not mind that it is all."
The mortification of Elizabeth Bennet isn't quite over yet. We're still got a couple more, torturous family things.
So she's worried about her father's reaction.
Yeah.
And because she in italics, his favorite child, should be distressing him by her choice of Darcy, that she doesn't want her father to think ill of her, and that she's doing this. And that's next. He calls her in. "Lizzie, what are you doing? Are you out of your..." Because Darcy has now gone to her father and asked.
So she's afraid of disappointing her father. She's afraid of either disappointing or pleasing her mother, because either way, that's not great. Either she's violently set against the match or violently delighted in it. It was certain that her manner would be ill adapted to do credit to her sense. Whatever the response is from Mrs. Bennet, we don't want it. So that's problem number two. Problem number one is Mr. Bennet. Yes.
He says, "What are you doing? Are you out of your senses to be accepting this man? Have you not always hated him?" And she's like, "Oh no." And then he says, he's like, "Oh, you'll have all this great stuff, but will they make you happy?" He's asking the same question that Jane has asked, that are you...
And again, coming at from such a, really such a sad space, which is, your lively talents would place you in the greatest danger in an unequal marriage. You could scarcely escape discredit and misery. My child, let me not have the grief of seeing you unable to respect your partner in life. You know not what you are about. Again, that's such a That's another emphasis. And it's such a poignant, this has happened to me. Please don't let me watch it happen to you.
To add to that, he says, well, before that, I know that you could be neither happy nor respectable unless you truly esteemed your husband, unless you looked up to him as a superior. We'll get to that in a little bit. Your lively talents would place you in the greatest danger in an unequal marriage. He recognizes that she needs a marriage with esteem, respect.
Yes.
That superior line grates a bit, but it's clearly the sense that which we've already seen with Elizabeth and Darcy. They both think that the other one is the best.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the superior, thinking of him as superior, you could still technically be equals, but thinking of him as a superior, does grate a little bit of the, I gotta think that this person's better than me and I don't deserve them. And it does imply that kind of inequality within it. But I don't also think that Mr. Bennet's wrong necessarily in his assessment that if she is bored in a relationship, if she is in an unequal marriage, she's just a little bit too smart and lively for that to be safe, really, in the long term. I mean, again, I think too, something that we underestimate in this text is, again, how dangerous Wickham is to Elizabeth too. While Elizabeth may never necessarily fall for him emotionally, he's very dangerous to her credibility. And everyone assumes for a very long time that she is in some sort of relationship with him enough to be upset when he runs off with Lydia. Again, public perception is right on the edge of her being inappropriate, and he's not wrong, I think, in that, it's a slippery slope then to discredit and misery.
Yeah. But get back to what that you said there too. Also that, let me not have the grief of seeing you unable to respect your partner in life, meaning I don't respect my partner in life. It's made me miserable. He's not in a happy marriage, and he's had to retreat into this world where he just makes fun of everyone and makes jokes about everyone and is by himself instead of with a partner that he respects and can enjoy time spent with. He can't do that.
And again, this is another moment, I think, again, of Elizabeth learning a lesson. How earnestly did she then wish that her former opinions had been more reasonable, her expressions more moderate? She's always kind of reveled, I think, in saying what she thinks without having to moderate it in any way. Well, now that these are the consequences, which is no one believes her then when she says that her opinions have changed. So,
she convinces him, I could not have parted with you. I could not have parted with you, my Lizzie, to anyone less worthy. And then she tells him what Darcy did with Lydia and Wickham. And she reveals that. And his response is, it's funny, but it's so inappropriate. Like, really?
It's classic. Just Mr. Bennet.
It will save me a world of trouble and economy. Had it been your uncle's doing, I must and would have paid him. But these violent young lovers carry everything their own way. I shall offer to pay him tomorrow. He will rant and storm about his love for you, and there will be the end of the matter. Like, oh my God, he did that? That's terrible. Oh, wait, no, that's great. Now
I must pay him back.
I'm not going to have to pay him back. He's too rich to pay
He's
back.
Rich, yeah. and he's so in love with you that it doesn't matter.
Man, Mr. Bennet just gets everything.
He
gets his way, and he just gets to sit back and enjoy. Now, he's also an enjoyable character. He's not a bad guy.
No, and none of the I'm getting my own way stuff happens.
He's been neglectful.
And it doesn't really necessarily happen at the expense of anyone else. I mean, obviously, it literally happens to the expense of Darcy, but not in a cruel way, I guess.
Lydia's stuck with Wickham.
True.
But that may have happened.
When I say
anyway,
it doesn't happen at the expense of other people, I mean he accidentally falls into situations where yes, it's happening at the expense of other people, but not in a malicious way on his part.
Well, if any,
he's even maybe pleased to have Darcy as a son-in-law.
He said, if any young men come for Mary or Kitty, send them in, for I am quite at leisure.
I do love that line.
Yes. Mrs. Bennet's reaction is first she sat quite still and unable.
As probably
to
as
utter
still
a
as she
syllable.
ever gets, as quiet as she ever gets.
And then just the explosion. But it all centers on how rich and great you will be, what pin money, what jewels, what carriages you will have. Jane is nothing to it, nothing at all. And then, right, such a charming man.
And so handsome, so tall.
Apologize for my having disliked him so much before. Like,
I hope he will overlook it.
180.
I do feel like the so tall too is tacked in because she genuinely couldn't think of another compliment. You know, he's rich, he's charming, he's handsome, he's tall. You know, other adjectives here.
And then it's, she tell me what dish Mr. Darcy is particularly fond of that I may have it tomorrow.
Special license. See, this too, she's worried that Lady Catherine's going to interrupt this, so she wants them married as fast
and a
as
special license. You must and shall be married by a special license. Like, this is too good to be true. You better do it right away. And
lock this down.
For people who don't know, a special license means that you wouldn't have to wait the period. How many times do you have to say the banns at the church?
I want to say 6, but I don't know if I actually got that number.
I think it's 6 times the banns have to be announced at church, and then you can get married. But if you get a special license, then you can just get married, or you can run off the Gretna Green in Scotland to get married.
You can pull a Lydia basically and get married real quick.
She recognizes that, oh, wait a minute, we better do this quickly, because this, like, you can't miss this opportunity.
No, and that there is still a threat here, which is that Lady Catherine, we know, does not approve.
Well, she doesn't know that, but yes.
Yeah, but that, there we know, yes, that their potential is there.
And then she quiets down. She was stood in such awe of her intended son-in-law that she ventured not to speak to him unless it was in her power to offer him any attention or mark her deference.
Finally, we catch a break, basically. It's like, finally, we found the thing that will make her stop.
Yes.
And I do like Mr. Bennet. I admire all my 3 son-in-laws highly. Wickham perhaps is my favorite, but I think I shall like your husband quite as well as Jane. I do love his insistence that Wickham is his favorite son-in-law. I think, again, that's just such a classic Mr. Bennet ongoing joke of course.
The penultimate chapter of the novel for our penultimate episode. Always use penultimate when given.
Yes, great word.
Is my philosophy. Chapter 60. She wanted Mr. Darcy to account for his having ever fallen in love with her. I mean, this is very playful too, that she's doing this. How could you begin? And he says, I cannot fix on the hour or the spot or the look or the words which laid the foundation. It is too long ago. I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. That's a really great.
Yes.
And it's the same line, because we've heard this, that she told Jane that it was
for all that she jokes about that it was seeing Pemberley, she's the same. And it is interesting, because I think reading it and then rereading it, you as a reader catch yourself looking for the moment as well of when did you first notice him? When did you first start to like him? When did you first think this? When did you too kind of, as a reader, I think, want to trace that, but it's very hard to do, because
especially on successive readings, you find yourself doing that. I know we did that the whole time. I mean, that we were like, oh, he's in love with her now, or she's in love with him, and
but we never did nail down one moment, did we?
But it is a gradual thing that happens. I mean, I think it's at Pemberley after they're together. They both finally realize themselves that this is it. But she can't admit it to herself, and we don't know if he can, because we don't get his point of view.
But again, I think it is one of those moments too where it's taking the sentimental novel and the language of sentiment and sensibility and turning it on its head, because in those novels, the minute they see each other, you're struck like with lightning, and you can't help but display that in your
what's going on. There's no lightning strikes.
Yep, nope.
Love at first sight.
Mm-hmm. She's like, this is what it is. Yeah.
There is some lust at first sight. Darcy is entirely attracted to her when he meets her, and he can't stop looking at her.
Yes.
And that's
recognizing the difference though between the attraction and the
And when you fall in
long-term,
love.
yeah, that develops. That's something that develops over time.
Yeah. When did you,
Yeah.
when ever having fallen in love, how could you be? So it's when did he begin to love her? The attraction, that lightning strike is only the first thing. And he may have had that, but didn't quite realize that she didn't have it, and had to go a gradual route. And then we get the, Elizabeth
Her teasing more.
and her observations. And he's like, she's like, did you think, because I was so impertinent? And he's like, oh, it was the liveliness of your mind. And she's like, come on.
Which is really impertinence, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. She's like, oh, you can call that impertinent, but she said, to be sure, no actual good of me, but nobody thinks of that when they fall in love. And she's right too.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. And it is interesting that she's like, it's because I was different. You withstood my beauty, you withstood my manners, but I bet it was that you were disgusted with the women who were always speaking and looking and thinking for your approbation alone. I roused and interested you because I was so unlike them. Had you really not been amiable, you would have hated me for it. But in spite of the pains you took to disguise yourself, your feelings were always noble and just. And in your heart, you thoroughly despised the persons who so assiduously courted you. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because she's playing on something that he previously considered a vice, which is his pride. He said, I saw everyone as kind of being beneath me. And she's sort of flipping that on him and saying, yeah, and that's why you saw me and I was not treating you the way, other people treat you. And that intrigued you. And that's why. So really something that you thought was a bad thing actually turned out to kind of be a good thing here. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you knew no actual good of me. And this I found very interesting, especially because when we talked way ages ago about her going, I think you asked me when I really fell in love with Elizabeth as a character. And I said, it's when she walks to Netherfield to take care of Jane when she's sick, because that is such I don't care to go in the carriage. I don't care if my hem is in mud. Yeah. I think that's such a moment when so many people do fall in love with Elizabeth as a character, and to have it brought back and be like, was there no good in your affectionate behavior to Jane while she was ill at Netherfield? Which is again, he has clearly logged that and been thinking about, I was really impressed by that thing that happened ages and ages and ages ago that you probably forgot. Yeah. And she in very classic Elizabeth stuff, oh, dearest Jane, who could have done less for her, but make a virtue of it by all means.
She tries to blow it off, but it's true. That she really showed that was, she is good. And that's how, when she proved it, that's her character.
Yeah.
And then she starts like, well, why were you so shy? Like recently when you came back, and he's like, well, why were you?
Yeah. Because you were grave and silent, but I was embarrassed. Well, so was I.
That they both were going through the same thing. And this is them learning that, we were behaving in the same way because we had both fallen in love with each other.
And we get a version of that line from Emma. You might have talked to me more when you came to dinner. And Darcy says, a man who had felt less might, that's the, if I felt less, I could talk about it more.
Yeah.
Kind of proto version of that line.
Well, she asks, what did you come down to Netherfield for to begin with? And he says, yeah, well, it was to see you. That's, the only reason I came down, to judge whether I could ever hope to make you love me. He's, that's it. They're done. They're together. They're all but married, right?
Yeah. And Lady Catherine has been of infinite use.
Yes. So
which ought to make her happy, for she loves to be of use.
Thank you, Lady Catherine.
With the knife.
Yeah. Now they have to write and then I love this. There's like all this letter writing. She's
including the most giddy letter I think I've ever read in my life, which is from her.
She makes a joke too. She says, I might sit by you and admire the evenness of your writing, as another young lady once did.
Never one to not dread. We've forgotten all about poor Caroline.
Not the poor Caroline. But then Elizabeth writes to her aunt And then in this letter, yeah, like you suppose more than really existed, she's telling her aunt, but now suppose as much as you choose.
Yeah, I was cross because you saw too much. Now I'm happy because you saw too much, and you may believe it.
And then you are all to come to Pemberley at Christmas. I mean, she's, you know.
Thank you again and again for not going to the lakes. How could I be so silly as to wish it?
Yep, she's got it all now. And then she writes to her aunt. Darcy writes to Lady Catherine,
which I would have loved to have gotten a copy.
I know. I want to read that letter.
But you know what? Mr. Bennett's letter to Mr. Collins pretty much makes up for it.
Collins, yeah. So read that one.
Dear sir, I must trouble you once more for congratulations. Elizabeth will soon be the wife of Mr. Darcy. Console Lady Catherine as well as you can. But if I were you, I would stand by the nephew. He has more to give. Yours sincerely.
Which we'll find out the reaction to that letter in a moment.
Yes, but again, it's so, you know, that for me, that I forgive Mr. Bennet everything because he just, you know, the equivalent of smacking the man in the face. He has more to give.
And then we get Caroline Bingley writes congratulations to her brother on his approaching marriage. The letter was all that was affectionate and insincere. She wrote to Jane on the occasion, and Jane was not deceived this time, but she was affected.
Yeah.
As Jane would be.
And though feeling no reliance on her, could not help writing her a much kinder answer than she knew was deserved. So she knows it's not deserved and felt no reliance on her. I think, again, that's a distinction that Austen makes, which is very mature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then Georgiana writes 4 pages to Darcy expressing her delight that he is marrying Elizabeth and she'll have her as a sister.
Yeah.
There's this flurry of letters going on all of a sudden. It's like 5 letters. How many letters? It's Elizabeth, Darcy, Mr. B, Caroline, Georgiana. It's 5 letters. Like bang, bang. Everybody's writing letters to each other. Mm-hmm. Well, the Collinses, then Mr. and Mrs. Collins, Charlotte and Mr. Collins come to Lucas Lodge. Lady Catherine had been rendered so exceedingly angry by the contents of her nephew's letter that Charlotte, really rejoicing in the match, was anxious to get away till the storm was blown over. But I also wonder, is that also not Mr. Collins taking Mr. Bennet's advice?
Yes. Yeah,
because
I rather think
Mr. Collins be there, like consoling Lady Catherine, like, oh, well,
you would think,
but
you would think that if Mr. Collins didn't, on some level, agree with Charlotte, then they wouldn't go, regardless of Charlotte's feelings on the matter. So
they head off, and Lady Catherine's left to fume on her own.
Yeah,
and she's even lost Mr. Collins.
Yes,
Mr. Collins.
How do you lose Mr. Collins? Usually you're trying to get rid of him. He's like a bad penny. How do you lose that?
Well, Darcy is now put to the test. With the parading.
The pleasure was dearly bought.
The parading and obsequious civility of Mr. Collins to him, Sir William Lucas, and complimenting and talking about, oh yes, well, next one we're at St. James's court. And worst of all is Mrs. Phillips' vulgarity, Mrs. Bennet's sister. Darcy,
and again, it's flipped because the really, again, now the onus is not on Mr. Darcy to be polite. You know, we recognize now that these are people you don't want to have a conversation with, and that he's doing actually a very good thing by only shrugging his shoulders when they're out of the line of sight.
Yep. Elizabeth did all she could to shield him from the frequent notices of either of Mrs. Phillips and then was ever anxious to keep him to herself and to those of her family with whom he might converse without mortification. Like one of the things that she has learned too is one of the things that he laid into her, that like, your family doesn't behave well.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, she's okay. And she and finished that, and she looked forward the end of that.
Yes.
Chapter.
I was just looking at it. And though the uncomfortable feelings arising from this took from the season of courtship much of his pleasure, it added to the hope of the future. And she looked forward forward with delight to the time when they should be removed from society, so little pleasing to either, to all the comfort and elegance of their family party at Pemberley. Ah,
That sounds like the end line of a novel. Now, there's another
does.
chapter where Austen likes to give like, and then this is what happens to everybody that we'll get next week. But in a sense,
that's kind of, yeah.
That's the end of the novel.
Again, the penultimate chapter. That's
this is what we get. That Austen, Dickens does this as well. Dickens always adds another chapter at the end where we find out about people. It's the penultimate chapter that the novel really ends on, and that it's that. And just before that passage is but part of that is the hope of the future.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what we're finishing with.
We acknowledge again that. Yeah, we acknowledge that all the people we've been with, it's society so little pleasing to either, but we're going to move on from that. And we're all going to have Christmas in Pemberley.
She's not going to have to deal with some of these people going to Pemberley. Everything's going to be great.
Everything's going to be great. It's all great. Oh, it's all good. Everything's good. Yeah.
Well, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where we are, and next week we'll wrap up the novel. Can't
believe it's almost over.
I know. I started to hit me a couple weeks ago. It started to hit me before the last show. When I was doing the notes for it, like, it's what the end.
But what an end! What an end!
Jay-Nights, thank you all for tuning in today. Thanks to our show sponsor, Lisa Washington. Thanks to all of you who have donated or joined as members over the last week. Your support helps us bring this show to everyone, create other one-of-a-kind programs and courses, and also helps us care for our collections at the Rosenbach. I want to thank Janice R. Of Longport, New Jersey, who made an extra donation along with her raffle ticket. I'm sorry you didn't win the raffle, Janice, but thank you also for that and for the extra donation. Some of you has even joined as members. There was a bunch of them this week. It was Kenny M. from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Jeff S. from Westchester, PA, Adrian W. from Philadelphia, and Lynn B. from Philadelphia, who got a membership and also made a donation, and Geraldine T. from Collegeville, PA, who also joined and made a donation. Thank you so much. You can also help support future Rosenbach free programs by entering our Austen Mondays raffle. This week, the prize is a private tour with me of the Rosenbach's Jane Austen holdings for you and 9 guests. You can do this virtually or in person, and you have all week to enter. I will pull the winner on our next show, March 20th. Like the Austen Mondays video, subscribe to the channel, leave comments there as well. Thanks to Brianna, who was our chat Mrs. Reynolds, managing our links in the chat. Thanks to Claudia Johnson for taking a turn about the room with us today. Join us next week for the final episode of Austen Mondays, when all 3 co-hosts, Kathleen Hudson, Casey McMillan, and Lauren Nixon, will join me to talk about the final chapter of the novel and wrap up this entire series. And we have announced the next book. It's not a book, it's a collection of many stories.
This has been a very busy episode. There's been a lot to process here.
Sherlock Mondays will happen in the fall. And yes. I am so excited to do Sherlock Mondays, let me tell you. So
hardly shows.
That'll be a blast. Kathleen, thank you. I'm so happy I got to finish this with you.
Yes, thank you. It was so great to do this, and this has just been wonderful.
Great. I'll see you next week. Thanks to Tucker Christine, who wrote our opening and closing credits music. Thanks to my daughter Lulu, who shot and created the credits with me and has been pulling the winners of the raffle. Farewell, readers. Hoping you are all in the middle before you realize it. All right, everyone. Have a great week. I'll see you next time. Bye.